Cuts. The most basic and common type of transition is the cut. A cut happens when one shot instantly replaces the other. Cuts are so widely used that in a feature movie you can normally count thousands of them. Cuts are essential for the effects of juxtaposition, especially as demonstrated by the Kuleshov experiment. According to Kuleshov, audience find an invisible relation between shots cut together and placed adjacently. They tend to find a relation between them. Almost most cuts exist simply for a technical need. The abrupt replacement of one shot by the other will elicit or prompt a certain response interpretation from the viewer. Cuts became industry standard for two reasons. First, during the early years of cinema, when editing actual film, the editor could very easily cut the celluloid strip with a blade or scissors and splice it together. Any other type of transition would require further processing from a specialized lab, which resulted in increased costs. Cuts allowed for a better flow of the movie with little distractions on the frames. This is the simplest way to go from one shot to the next. Technically, a basic cut isn't even a transition. The first shot leads right into the second, stitching the scene into a larger sequence. A cut transition is also the quickest, smoothest, and cleanest way to jump from one picture or clip to another. A viewer won't even register it as a transition if it is properly motivated, and sometimes that's what the filmmaker wants. If your content is deep or serious, the last thing you need is a flashy transition to distract the viewer from what is really important. However, cuts can be used in creative ways to amplify a scene's intensity or create surreal moments. For example, a jump cut makes unnatural cuts within one shot, effectively chopping up the timeline so that it feels fast-paced or jarring. The basic rules of cuts makes it mandatory to go for a cut at an appropriate time of movement. It is also motivated by the need to give emphasis to emotions on a scene and to boost them. If it is indispensable, it is better to avoid jump cuts. Then it becomes a term for a bad edit. Cutaways are certain cuts used to avoid jump cuts. A cutaway is a shot of something related to but outside the main action of a scene. It is a short cut that cuts away from the primary action to a separate or secondary action, hence its name cutaway. Insertion of this shot will give adequate time and logic for the audience to think about a change that may happen in relative action, space, or properties in the main action. For instance, a master shot of a school teacher lecturing to his students can use a cutaway transition of the principal standing at the door listening. Then we can cut back to the shot of the teacher lecturing if there was any sort of jump in the master shot. The shot of the principal is the cutaway shot. In this instance, the cutaway also acts as a reaction shot. A shot of a subject's face will help to capture an emotional response. Dissolve. This is the second most commonly used transition in motion pictures, and unlike most straight cuts, it attracts attention to itself on purpose. The dissolve is defined as a gradual change from the ending visual of one shot into the beginning visual of the next shot. Also known as overlapping, dissolves happen when one shot is smoothly replaced by the next. One disappears as the following appears. For a few seconds, they overlap when both visuals are visible. Dissolves are commonly used to signify the passage of time. A dissolve may also be referred to as a lap dissolve, a lap, and sometimes a video mix. The standard default duration of dissolves in editing software is 1 second, but this length can be easily changed as per the requirements of various factors at that particular point in the story. The dissolve is most often used when there is a shift in time, there is a shift in location. Dissolves can also be used when the time factor in the narrative needs to be slowed down or speeded up. It can also work as an emotional component to the subject in the story. Dissolves are sometimes used to establish a strong visual relationship between the outgoing and the incoming images. For a good dissolve, at least one of the following elements must be addressed. They are: A. The new shot should contain some new information for the viewer, even as the dissolve will be condensing time over a long continuous event. Changing time periods or locations, or joining dissimilar concepts through matching imagery, the second shot into which the dissolve merges should offer something new both to the viewer and to the narrative development of the movie. B. There should be a specific motivating action that asks to apply a dissolve. This could be moving backwards or forwards through time, one space to another, or into or out of states of consciousness. C. The two shots that are dissolving together should have compositions that can overlap easily. These compositions can include similarity in tone and colors also. Dissolve is also the earliest transition used in films. It has a history that is quite poetic. Before the cut was adopted as the go-to transition, the dissolve started out as a relatively straightforward way of combining multiple shots together. It was quite suggestive of the transitions in magic lantern slideshows, and the viewers of those times were easily able to associate with this transition. Achieving a dissolve was as simple as shooting your scene in those days. It could be achieved in the camera itself by rewinding the last few seconds of the negative and continuing recording your next scene. This in-camera process allowed a bridge to be built between the images. This also helped the audience to move from one scene to another without any jarring cuts. Following the dissolve, many other methods of transition like fades, wipes, and the cuts came into popularity in the language of film. The cut replaced the dissolve as the bridge between shots, and the dissolve then became the transition that held different scenes together. Thereafter, dissolves became a way for filmmakers to convey a deeper meaning and connect scenes even as a special effects technique. A dissolve now is used mostly to signal an ellipsis of time to convey passage of long periods of time a character spends waiting for someone or something, a change of season, etc. Just check the beautiful dissolves that Francis Ford Coppola has employed for his version of Dracula, where the lead character Jonathan is on his way to the fortress of Count Dracula away from his fiancée Mina. Fade in, fade out. Fade-ins and fade-outs are another most common type of transition. Fade-outs happen when the picture is gradually replaced by black screen or any other solid color. Traditionally, fade-outs have been used to conclude movies. Fade-ins are the opposite. A solid color gradually gives way to picture, commonly used in beginning of movies or in the start of scenes. An average feature film will have only a couple of fades. Fades are used sparingly because they usually imply the end of a major story segment. Fades are also utilized when allowing the audience time to catch their breath after an intense sequence. In Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction 1994, one fade-out takes place right after the character Butch, played by Bruce Willis, rams his car into Marcellus Wallace, an unexpected accident that drastically alters the lives of those two characters. Just check the same type of usage in Alexandre Inarritu's Amoris Perros. Typically, a fade-in will start with a black background and then the scene will slowly become visible. A fade-out, on the other hand, concludes a scene by fading it to the black or another solid color like red. These transitions are also dramatic and conclusive. Some directors also like to use fades to wrap up one storyline, giving viewers a chance to comprehend the action before diving into another scene. Ingmar Bergman is one filmmaker who used this transition very often. He used fades in his classic films, giving spectators a mental space to analyze and soak into the emotions expressed. In his film Cries and Whispers, he experimented with using fades to red, which effectively gelled with the narrative of the film. Wipe. A wipe is a very dated form of transition that is not often regularly adopted in modern filmmaking. Wipes are dynamic. They happen when one shot pushes the other off frame. Effectively, the shot is wiped from the screen to reveal the next shot in a variety of creative ways. The earliest known example of a wipe was George Albert Smith's Mary Jane's Mishap of 1903. George Lucas made sweeping use of wipes in his Star Wars films, inspired by a similar use of wipes by Akira Kurosawa. New softwares has several wipe transitions that change over time. These transitions are divided into 11 categories, and each category lists down multiple options which can be used in videos to give some amazing results. Light flash. This transition is becoming more and more popular recently. Basically, the light flash transition quickly dissolves the screen to white for a fraction of a second, so it resembles a camera flash. And immediately, the new shot dissolves in while the white flash overlaps the dissolving process. This effect is a little bit more of a novelty compared to the fades and dissolves. Naturally, it has much professional uses. These transitions are also an easy method of transition from moving pictures to still photography. Check the sequences from the famous German film Run Lola Run by Tom Tykwer. The major concern with flash transitions is to use them in moderation. Though it is a really cool effect, it does not work in every situation. It can be judiciously applied for specific instances where you are looking for high energy action. Sometimes, flashes are also used with an adjacent still shot and sound effects to signify that photographs are being taken. Iris. An old-fashioned transition hardly employed today is the iris. This is a transitional device in which the image contracts or expands within a small circle. In fact, a circular masking closes the picture to a black screen here. The iris transition replaces one image with another by either growing or shrinking a shape with all the area crossed by that shape's border replaced by the second image. The iris transition can be in or out. If it is in, the shape appears to shrink inward from the edges of the screen towards the center. If it's out, the shape appears in the center of the screen and grows outward until the video it contains fills the whole screen. Iris effects are regularly found in children's cartoons like this example from Disney's Tom and Jerry. Pixelation. This is a kind of transition used more often in video films and music albums rather than films. The pixelate transition starts with the first video or image, blurs it like the pixelate effect. It is done by dividing the first image into squares and filling each square with the average color of all of the squares and increasing the size of the squares over time. Halfway through, that is at maximum pixelation, it switches to an equally pixelated version of the second video and then decreases the size of the squares over time. At the end, what remains is a perfectly sharp new video or image. If you go through any new editing software, numerous versions of each of the transitions that we have discussed above can be found. But the judicious and apt use of these transitions depends on the discernment of the film editor who chooses it. As we discussed earlier, these decisions determine the flow and the pace of the film and adds to the quality of invisible editing of films.